Hello, and welcome to the Sales SOS Podcast. This is Liz Hyman, and I'm here with crew member uh, Mike Simmons. Hang on a second. I'm trying to hide that. There we go. All
Perfect.
right. Someday I will learn how to drive Restream, but I haven't yet. I'm Liz Hyman, and this is Mike Simmons, and today we're going to be talking about sales process, which is mine and Mike's favorite thing to agree and disagree about. So it's July, and so it's just us today, just the two of us, which is kind of exciting. We haven't had a chance to do this before. Well, we have actually quite a long time ago on your podcast.
And multiple times where we didn't record either. So there we go. Here we are. Now this will be out there with everybody. And who knows, maybe we actually kicked everybody out because this was a topic so near and dear to our heart that we're
I have to admit, it was kind of in my head that we could possibly just have this conversation, the two of us, and how fun it would be. Anyway, so this is the Sales SOS podcast, and you're on LinkedIn Live with us. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation about sales process, and we are going to do this live, but we're also going to turn it into 4 podcasts. And so I'll be stopping every once in a while to launch each of the individual podcasts. Mike, we have this unique opportunity, and maybe I should wait till we launch the first part of it to actually introduce ourselves, because with so many people, we never get to do that. But, why is it that you and I are here and doing this? So let me launch. We're going to introduce ourselves, and then let's, and I have to apologize to all of you that are on if my voice is really funky. This is my 5th day of COVID. So my voice is really funky today. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch the first one. So, hi, this is Liz Hyman, and this is your Sales SOS podcast. I'm here with crew member Mike Simmons, and we're going to talk about sales process today. So in this first segment where we're talking about sales process, we're going to talk about what is sales process? Why do we have it? Why does it matter? What do people think it is? So we're just going to have a conversation about that. And then we're going to stop and we're going to talk about some other issues in our next segments. So, Mike, we don't get to do this very often. So why don't you, since it's just the two of us, since it's July and everybody else is on vacation today, which is fabulous, Mike and I are going to talk about our favorite topic to disagree and agree about, and that is sales process. And it's really near and dear to both of our hearts because it's what helps us do the job that we do. And I think in this case, it's a good time to introduce ourselves and sort of so everybody can understand why this is so important to us. So let me quick introduce myself. And then, Mike, I want you to take a little bit longer and just talk about what you do and why you do it. So I'm Liz Hyman. Bryn Tillman dubbed me the Sales Operating System Architect. And what I do is I help companies who are in transition, they're growing, whatever it is that's changing in their world, to really rethink their sales operations. Why are we doing what we do? How are we positioning ourselves? And I create what I call a sales operating system. And in that sales operating system, we talk about all the critical foundational items that you need in order to support a sustainable, productive sales organization. And that includes everything from what's the sales process, what's the CRM look like, what's your messaging, all the way through how do you manage and how do you grow accounts. So I'm building the process for those things. So that's what I do. Mike, tell us about you and why this topic is important to you.
Well, first off, I love the acronym SOSA. You're like Sammy Sosa. We're going back into baseball. We're hitting balls out of the park. We're winning business. And I know a lot of times people get in and they start to connect sports and business and military stuff and business and all of these other stories that we connect with each other because they're relatable. Like we've gone through, everybody out there has experienced a bad sales process.
Yes.
And a lot of times Liz, how do you know it's a bad sales process as a buyer? How do you know it's a bad sales process as a buyer?
Oh, there's so many ways. But if it's uncomfortable for me as a buyer, It's a bad sales process.
Yeah, right. You feel like it's something that you're stuck inside their process, right?
Right.
Like you're the one who's trying to buy something. You've got the problem, and there are a number of areas where Liz and I will be directly aligned on this stuff. And broadly speaking, we're aligned on what our objective is, which is help people solve problems. Get out there, like design for predictable results. This is where you get into the operating system. So my background is combination of operations, United Parcel Service for a number of years, then customer success before it was called customer success, then account executive type roles, both small, medium-sized business, and then enterprise, and then moved into sales leadership roles, and then launched a business where I help organizations go to market, really simplifying their approach to leadership, culture, revenue, and execution. And the way that we can simplify our approach is by having an operating system. And that's where it's really cool to hear, be talking with the sales operating system architect who knows we have operating systems to help us create predictable results throughout the process. And the cool thing about systems, at least the way that I like to think of systems, and I'm a big people process tools kind of person, the tools and processes combined create your system.
Right.
Yep. So, I'm the guy that helps people address the revenue challenge when they're struggling, figuring out how to create that growth inside their business. And many times that revenue challenge is actually a culture challenge in disguise, and culture starts with leadership. And that's where all of this kind of comes back into that execution piece.
And it's really interesting how much culture weaves through this sales process and rears its ugly head sometimes in the middle of it. So let's just start at the beginning. Mike, what's a sales process? What on earth do we mean by this word? And what's interesting, and Mike's kind of laughing because that is not a simple question. It's not like I just said, oh, what's a piece of chalk? Like, what's a sales process?
Yeah. So I think the first question that you have to ask when that question comes up, and I know people don't like it when you answer a question with a question, but the answering a question with a question is more about kind of validating understanding, getting some kind of an alignment. And that's part of a sales process that we do when we're going through kind of a little bit of discovery. And discovery might be a portion of the thing that happens inside a sales process. I don't think discovery is a stage. I think discovery happens all the way throughout. If you're not discovering, you're not learning. But to get back to your question, the definition of sales process changes depending on whether or not you're looking at from the buyer perspective, the person who has the problem, that customer journey, the organization perspective, how we do what we do, or how we create a predictable forecast, how we forecast what we're going to do. And then the third group is the rep, how the rep does the work that they do. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people like us who are out in the marketplace who confuse the heck out of people because we talk about process and we're talking about the rep, or we talk about process and we're talking about forecasting, or we talk about process and we're talking about the customer, but we don't clarify that here we're talking about buyer journey, or here we're talking about sales process for forecasting, or here we're talking about sales approach. So that's one big piece. If you break it down though and say sales, so sales is about solving problems, connecting the dots between problems that are known and unknown. That's my definition of it. And then process is a series of steps that, if done in a order, create a predictable outcome. If at any point in time that order gets cut or that order fails or things stop, then typically you're not going to get to the outcome that you were looking for. And if you're just kind of going after it and things happen organically in the way that you sell, you do not have you have an organic sales process that is not transferable to others, and you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about that is the tradition that I come out of, which is the Miller-Hyman tradition. And for those of you who are following us and don't know this yet, my dad is Steve Hyman and wrote Strategic Selling, or he and Bob Miller wrote it. But what my dad used to say and still says is, I did not go and create a sales process. I did not go and create something. What I did was go identify what is it that the best salespeople do. And I turned it into something that is a process that is repeatable. And so if we look at successful salespeople, and we look at struggling or inconsistent salespeople, what we find is successful salespeople tend to go through the same process all the time. Does that mean it doesn't change order ever? Sure, it does. Things flip and flop on you in the sales process, but they consistently do the same things, and they do things that make them successful. Inconsistent salespeople are very reactive, and they do whatever's happening at the time. Really, somebody called me, I'll do this. Somebody asked me, I'll do this. It's this sort of, instead of it's time to do this, and it's time to do this, and now I need to understand this, and this is the next step, and here we go from here. And it's repeatable. Wash and rinse, fold and dry, put it back in. I'm going to do household chores, and you're going to do sports. Everybody's going to love you better, Mike.
Well, no, but it's true. Like, we relate to these things. So there's Liz, how often do you get a chance to work with people who are like, I'm just not very process driven. I don't like processes. That's not my thing. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, all the time. And what's really interesting is there's this myth about salespeople. Good salespeople think on their feet. Good salespeople, they're just naturals. Good salespeople just know what to say to people, and good salespeople can just close a deal because they have so much personality. And Mike, if you're listening to us, you can see Mike can barely stand up straight. He's laughing so hard, right? No, this isn't true. This isn't true. A natural salesperson is not somebody who just wings it, flying by the seat of their pants all the time, hoping and praying. You cannot make a good living on hopes and prayers.
You cannot
run a business on hopes and prayers.
You can't scale. How would you build scale? Like, imagine if everybody just walked in the door. It's like, what am I going to do today? Yeah, what am I going to do today?
And that's what most people do. And they walk in the door, and what's the very first thing most salespeople do? Most people do when they walk in the door to the office. They sit down at their desk, or they flip on their computer, however you call getting to work that day. What's the very first thing everybody does?
Check email.
Check email. What happens when you check email?
All of a sudden, you're working for somebody else. You're dealing with the fires of whatever somebody else has made your priority.
Everybody else's priority becomes your priority. And so all of those things that you should be doing, all of those priorities that you set up in your CRM, all of that follow-up, all of that research, gone. And you're going to spend your day putting out fires, right? You're going to spend your day reacting to what everybody else thinks is so urgent that may or may not be important. And what happens when we do that is this dopamine thing happens, right? So rather than getting my dopamine and adrenaline hits by doing my sales work that helps drive my success, I'm going to get my dopamine and adrenaline hits by reacting to everything that's going on and getting all upset and excited by the things that my customers are saying and doing, and get totally trapped in and caught in that and never get to the part that really is priorities. So your sales process drives your daily priorities and daily activity is what we're saying.
Yeah. And think about it. So a lot of people, everybody has a computer. Well, excuse me. Most people have a computer. They're working on a computer. We're doing this with computers in front of us. Computers have an operating system. That operating system routes stuff. It allows you to use resources effectively. It determines where do you want to throttle things up and put more power, and where do you want to slow some things down and maybe conserve a battery. So to Liz's point, is she was talking at the beginning, your sales system or your sales organization should also have an operating system that will allow you to throttle certain things up, back off certain things, understand where some resource limitations are. And a key component of that is this thing that we're talking about, which is a sales process. So how do you define sales process?
So the sales process are the steps, the activities, the steps and activities that a salesperson needs to go through in order to close a deal. To get a deal, from getting a deal to closing a deal, or identifying an opportunity to closing an opportunity, which is a word I prefer. Yep. So It's everything that needs to be done along the way. And that a sales process has defined stages. It has rules for moving between stages. It has a list of activities that go with each stage. It has a list of questions that need to be answered at each stage. And it has a list of tools that are needed for the salesperson to be effective in each of those stages. And
But
what I did,
this all feels so complicated. Like, what do you mean? I have to answer all questions and I have to do all of these things. It's so complicated. I just go in there and I smile and I talk with people and I get deals done.
yeah, well, what happens when we don't follow a process is we miss critical steps. And so one of the things about having a sales process is it helps the sales leaders and the salespeople identify where deals are falling apart. And if you don't follow a process, you are more likely to get surprises at the end. Well, he really liked me. We were having a great conversation. I knew we were going to get it. I have no idea what happened. And you can't know what happened because you didn't ask the questions to understand what could go wrong, what could stop the sale. So those questions about, hey, who wouldn't want this to buy this? What could get in the way of us closing this deal? What are your biggest concerns about implementing this technology? When we don't ask those questions, when they're not part of the sales process and we don't ask them, we get surprises. So when we have, and I'm not saying that you have to ask every single question every single time. I'm not suggesting that your sales process is a list of questions through which you drag your customer kicking and screaming, and you have to ask every single one because heaven forbid you forget to ask one of the questions. It's like, no, this is not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about a script. I'm not talking about having to say exactly this, or when you ask this, or what you say when someone does this. Those are great guides that we can have to help us do things better, but your sales process just helps you to understand at this stage, it's important to understand and know these things. At this stage, it's important to deliver this information. At this stage, the sales rep is going to need a tool that will help them write a proposal. At this stage, the sales rep probably is going to need a list of answers or ways to discuss objections. At this stage, they might need a bunch of success stories. Like, what do you need during each part of the buying process in order to support that person, the salesperson and the buyer, to make them successful? And I think this is, Mike, you started with this earlier and didn't say it like really, really outright, which is if your sales process does not match the buyer journey, you will not be successful. And what you will do is drag your buyer kicking and screaming through your sales process, probably unsuccessfully.
And when you do it, it doesn't necessarily have to like match up perfectly. It does need to be aligned. And when you think about it, you should get into those situations, and should's a tough word, but what I want to do when I look at both of those is I want to see how does our sales process enable the way we go to market and the way we do our work to close business, enable each of the conversions that I want to see happen on the buyer journey side. So I have to design for that buyer journey, I have to design for that enablement component. And then that third piece, and this is the one where I think a lot of people really screw up the sales process stuff, but can find a lot of value in if they do it really well. And this is where you get into the piece that Liz was talking about, having clear exit criteria in each of those stages. Every time I exit a stage, that's past tense. I've exited that stage. Your probability of sale should increase each time you exit the stage that gets you closer to closed won. And that's how you create an accurate forecast inside your business. You have all of the stuff, and it's right behind me. If I turn this way, it's right behind me. There's this funnel that kind of goes down, and we see at the top PC, pipeline created. That's the primary metric that I look for in sales teams. Like, what are we doing to create new opportunities? And then the next phase is pipeline develop. How are those things moving through each of the stages? And as they go through it, how is our probability of sale increasing? That helps us with forecasting. it's not a time thing. None of these stages are time bound, but you can look at the data and start to say, hey, it's kind of weird that customers, if you get really good data, the customers in this segment buying these types of products with these types of problems tend to stall in this stage. Maybe we can enable them in one way, shape, or form to convert through that, or come up with a different way to reduce friction in the process or something there. But this is where all that data really becomes helpful.
Yeah. So let's back up for a second, because we've just made a huge leap from sales process to what do you do with it.
Yeah.
So Mike just described one of the things that we do when we have a really good sales process that everyone uses consistently, following the same set of rules and definitions. Then we have consistent data in the CRM. That consistent data in the CRM enables us as leaders, or looking at our own pipeline, to start making decisions. Hey, we make it a discovery. Hey, these guys always get stuck here. Let's figure out what we need to do differently. Wow, these companies, the velocity they go through the funnel is much faster than these kinds of companies. Or, hey, if we start the buying process earlier, the buying cycle is much longer, but our close ratios are much higher. So when we have data that's consistent, because we have a consistently documented sales process that everybody agrees on, then we have all of this information, and that enables the company to better support the salesperson by identifying what's going wrong. It also allows them to identify, I noticed this one sales rep always gets stuck here. What support does that one sales rep need to not get stuck here anymore? Yep. Or, hey, we're putting all of this group into, these kinds of buyers into the top of the funnel, and they're never closing. So maybe that's not our ideal customer, or maybe our language is wrong, or whatever. So that's one thing, is when you have a sales process and everybody's using it and the CRM is accurate, tons of data. The other side of it, as a sales rep, why are you burdening me with this sales process that just takes time, and you want all this information, and you want me to put in next actions, and you want all of this stuff from me? And if we turn it around as a salesperson and say, what do I really need in order to stay on top of the 100 leads or more, or opportunities or deals that are in my funnel, then I can start to say, I have a ton of work. It needs to be prioritized. I cannot remember it. I cannot remember what I talked to that person about 6 months ago, or where we left things, unless you have a photographic memory. You just can't manage 100 different conversations. And if it's 100 deals, it may be 300 different conversations or 400 different conversations. If you can remember those as a human being, you are superhuman. And we should be studying your brain, because it's just not humanly possible. So what does this process do for me? Well, one, it helps me think about next logical steps. So if I have a sales process and I have rules around that sales process, so at this stage, we do certain things, we provide certain things, we ask certain questions, then there's a natural progression that I can follow. The second thing is, I can say, when I'm writing my to-do list, my next actions for each one of those deals in the sales process, that's somewhere in the sales process, it helps me to think about what's my next logical step. Now I document that, give myself a reminder, and voila, I open up my work one day and it is all prioritized, and I know what to do next. And I can also look at my sales process. I can look at my CRM, and I can say, wow, I have not been doing the work at the top of my sales funnel or the prospecting, and I don't have enough stuff to hit my goals in 6 months. If it is not documented in there, if you do not know what your sales math is and be able to see it through the sales process, you can never make discoveries like that quickly and easily. So at any given time, I should have a pretty good idea about whether or not I'm going to hit my goals at any given time in the next 6 to 9 months.
Well, definitely. And the cool thing about documenting it, as much as I didn't find CRM religion, and it really was like Salesforce religion at the time, because the original CRM I was in was Siebel, and I know we're going to talk about CRMs a little bit later, but I didn't find Salesforce religion until I started leading teams. And then the conversation was, look, if you get this stuff in the system, then we don't need to have conversations about it. If you don't have it in the system, then we have to have conversations. So you can actually reduce the amount of time that we need to talk if you've got the information in there. And when you have the information in there, it will enable you to perform in your role. I mean, how many people have ever lost their keys in their house?
I never, ever have
Never.
ever lost my keys in my house or in my hand
Yeah. So
or in my purse.
if we have a process, when we walk in the door, we hang them on the key hanger and we always follow that process, then we'll consistently be able to find them when we walk out the door. And we laugh about it because it's simple and we know that this kind of stuff happens. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we as leaders create on behalf of our team is we overcomplicate these processes just for the sake of process, because it makes us feel good and warm and fuzzy because we created this amazing mechanical thing that ultimately turns into a nightmare and starts to look like one of those mousetrap games that you have where it's got to go through the tunnel and around the world and hit the string and drop the weight and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So one is to make it as simple as possible, but as complete as possible to support. And the idea here, again, is your sales process supports your salesperson to be successful. And that's what we want to do. So I want to wrap this up. So, a sales process is a tool that enables salespeople, sales managers, sales leaders, company leaders to understand what is happening along the buyer journey and the seller journey. And it helps us to make good decisions. It helps us to prioritize our work. And it helps us in a very, very noisy world with too much information and too many inputs to quickly and easily identify what I need to do next, and not have to, again, remember. We can't remember. So our sales process helps us stay on top of it. So any other last thoughts on what is a sales process? Why do we need it? How do we use it?
I mean, the only thing, and I'm sure we'll get into this in one of these. So this is a foreshadowing for another part of this discussion. But, common mistakes.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that next, because so in our next segment, when you join us there, we will be talking about the stages, and we're going to be talking about mistakes. So thanks for joining Mike and me for your Sales SOS podcast. And we'll see you when we go to our next topic. Okay. So our next topic. So here we go. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. I'm here with crew member Mike Simmons because everyone else is on vacation because it's July. And Mike and I are talking about our favorite topic, which is sales process. At least it's our favorite topic to discuss and debate about. Right now, we're going to talk about the stages. And we're going to talk about defining those stages. And we're going to talk about really different ways to go about it and why it matters. And this may seem like a big topic to spend 20 minutes on, but really it's not, because there's so many things that we can talk about. We can talk about how we each address this, which we do it very differently. And we can talk about the mistakes that we see and what happens, when we do things one way or another way. I think, so welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Liz.
I think let's start with the stages. Where do they start and where do they end? Before we talk about what they are, we can start talking about stages from marketing, from your very first engagement on the marketing side, all the way through close, and then back around again, right? Yep. So where do we want to start this discussion, Mike? I'm leaving it in your hands. Where do we want to start the sales process discussion? Do we want to start once it gets into the salesperson's hands, or way out at the beginning?
Yeah, I think let's just start it at the conversion point where an opportunity is recognized as a real opportunity. Because this is the Sales SOS podcast, so we're not going to talk about marketing, and we're not going to talk about all that other stuff. And we'll take advantage of us being here alone and everybody else being on vacation. Let's start with let's start with the opportunity being created, and let's finish with the opportunity confirming that we did what we said we were going to do. So that's going to be a little bit after the close. I mean, we've already gone through the implementation, but we confirm what we said we were going to do, and then we start a new opportunity if it's a renewal at that point in time. Good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
And so that first stage, when the deal is being created, is actually a very sticky subject. So it sounds really simple. So if we want to call that stage prospecting, and Mike's going to call it something else, so we're going to give him a second to talk about his way of doing it. But if we're talking about this part where it gets transferred, or the salesperson creates a deal, or a deal is created, it can be created in a couple of ways, right? In that very first stage, either the salesperson can find that deal or that opportunity within an existing client. That salesperson can have an idea about who they want to sell something to, or it can come in through marketing as a marketing qualified lead that has converted to a sales qualified lead, an MQL and an SQL. So those are places where a deal can get started. And I'm going to talk about the sticky part in a minute, but why don't we, so if that's where we're starting, Mike, how do you name your stages? And why do you name them that way?
So I'm very particular in the stages. And if we were talking about this maybe 5 years ago, I would have said super particular, like you have to name it this way. Now I'm less interested in the specific names. I'm more interested in the job to be done of the stage. Call it whatever you want. And the reason why I went that route is I was working with a client who had just implemented another sales process inside their organization, a sales system that was implemented inside the organization, and it wasn't working. It wasn't serving the purpose, but they were not going to go back in and rename all of the stages to align with the catalyst sale process. The catalyst sale process, it's validated. That's the first stage. All of the stages are past tense. You go through the gate. We've already gone through the gate. So it's something has happened in the past, and that's how you improve probability of sale. But the first stage for me is validated. And in validated, all we're doing here is validating that we see a scenario where we could potentially work with each other. So a couple of things have to happen. I have to have met you. I've had to have looked you in the eyes, had a conversation with you, and got a little bit of information out of the discussion. What do you care about? What are you doing? Why are we talking? What are you struggling with? Not like super, super, super detailed, just early stage, kind of like we just met up at the bar kind of thing. Validated. I want to validate that there's the potential for an opportunity for us to work with each other. And at that stage or that point, it gets put into CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever. And probability of sale is 5%, sometimes 10, but 5% is typically what I like to go with at that point.
Okay. Keep going, because we have a different language. So why don't you keep going through?
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So, and I'll move pretty quickly then. So validated first, let's validate that we see the yes, no answer, the binary question, binary statement, depending on how you want to look at it, they have to answer to say, yes, I've made it through the validated stages. I see a scenario where we would potentially work with each other. Okay. The next stage for me is qualified. Qualified means I understand the problem from the perspective of the customer. From a qualification framework perspective, I use this thing that looks like a hexagon. It's what problem, who has it, who's impacted by it, who cares about it, why does the problem persist, why is it important to solve, when do they need to solve it by, how are they solving today, how might they solve it in the future, and what's our 30, 60, 90. This is a stage where we will spend a lot of time. We'll spend a lot of time in this stage before we move and can call ourselves qualified. But at a minimum, what I need to understand is the problem from the perspective of the customer, their language, not my language of the problem, their language of the problem. The next piece is fit. So what I'm doing is I'm confirming fit on my side, and qualified would be 25%. Confirming fit on my side is based on my understanding of the problem, we can solve that problem with our solution as it sits. Okay. So that's fit on my side. 40%. Next stage is client confirmed fit. based on my understanding of the problem, what we've communicated about the solution, the client has confirmed that we are the right fit for them. We're agreed, we're aligned. And the cool thing about this fit stage is there's going to be a lot of back and forth. This is the area where that stage is going to kind of loop back and forth. And this is where things start to look a little bit like chutes and ladders with these stages. So I can, there are some organizations where people will accelerate really quick and then all of a sudden they have to go backward because they learn something new. So validated, qualified, fit, client confirmed fit, all past tense. Then we get into proposal approved. So we've delivered a proposal to the customer, has all of the information, has all the points, what problem we're solving, why it's important, business impact, how we're going to solve it, what the costs are, all the resources, people, time, whatever. Proposal approved. Then we move into closed won because there's a gap between proposal approved and closed won. Sometimes you get to proposal approved and everything is working really well, but then you run into a challenge with legal. And one of the first 7-figure deals that I thought we were going to close as a team, we lost because of 14 words in a piece of language with a bank. And that was like one of those things where like, come on, nobody's ever going to look at this thing. But the point of the stages is I move through validated, that's 5%, qualified, 25%, fit is 40%, client confirmed fit, 60%, proposal approved, 90%, closed won, 100%. And the last one for me is confirmed, which is typically 30 to 60 days after the relationship has kicked off, going back to the client saying, did we do what we said we were going to do? If yes, then let's talk about referrals and other groups where we could work with. If no, let's fix it now. Let's not fix it 90 days before the renewal in that kind of environment. But it's all past tense, all single questions to move through each of those gates. And the job to be done at each stage is to help us get more comfortable with forecasting probability of sale. This is not about client decision making. It's not about any of that kind of stuff. It's about probability of sale for me. How well can we forecast in the business? Helpful?
Yeah. So the couple things. Mike's stages are all past tense, but notice there was a definition for each stage. Sure. And there was like, this is what has to happen in order to move to the next stage. I call that a gate. And we'll talk a little bit more about gates or rules in the next segment. But so there's when we think about this, there's a stage, it's got a name, it's got a definition, and there's a rule to move it to the next stage. This is very, very important. I also want you to notice that, and we're going to talk more about this, Mike did not have meeting or demo. There was no activity that was listed as a stage, right? And we're going to talk about why that creates chaos later. So I approach this really differently. And I'm going to tell you, I'm very old fashioned, right? So I use the Miller-Hyman way of doing this. But what I will tell you is what I have seen is so much chaos in CRMs because the sales process and the naming is so convoluted. It creates so many problems that I have gone back to this kind of old fashioned way of doing it and, or reconfirmed this old-fashioned way of doing it. And rather than doing things past tense, my way of doing it is either present tense or present progressive, which is ing. And the idea is, and sometimes I have to do that with a team, the ing, because they need to understand that we're actually in the process of doing something now, right? So Mike's process starts with, he names it as completed. Mine is, we are in the process of doing this. Whichever one of those better fits your culture, I'm okay with.
100%.
But what's really important is just because it was completed doesn't mean you aren't going to go backwards. Sometimes you think you're really far along the way because you've got one person who's walked you through, and then somebody else comes in and you're like, oh, there's all these other people. We're not even qualified yet. Move it back. We thought we were solving. So my stages are prospect, qualify, and then I either use cultivate or solve,
okay,
close or closing, and then closed won or closed lost. Sometimes I add another stage in there if someone needs it, but these are really simple. The idea is simplicity here. Everybody understands what it means to prospect. We and we're going to talk about this prospecting one or verified one in a minute, or validated. So that first stage is I'm going out and looking for business and I'm putting it in here. I haven't had confirmation. I haven't had a confirmed conversation, but I know there's something real there. Like I had a conversation and Joe at this company told me they're going to build this and they're going to need to buy from us, so, or from somebody. So I'm going to put that in. Maybe it's, hey, they just built a road and they're going to need something done. Now that that road is complete, I'm going to put that in as an opportunity because I think we could get that one. So prospecting is this process of going out and finding new opportunities, filling the top of the funnel. This is filling the top of the funnel. Some of it could happen on the marketing side. A lot of it happens in the sales side in a lot of businesses. So that's the first step. Qualify or qualifying is the second step. This is the process where we have that first conversation or first couple conversations, maybe with one person or a couple different people. And we really understand do you have a need? Is there, and these are the basic old fashioned ones, right? I think we call them BAMF, right? Is there a need? Can we fill that need appropriately? Is there a fit? Is there some sort of a timeline during which they think this might possibly happen? Or is this like pie in the sky, maybe in 3 years? Is there some sort of budget that could be available to do this? Sometimes there's just no budget and it's not ever going to get done. Sometimes there's a set budget. Sometimes there's this wiggle room where we can find budget. And you might have other things that you qualify with. Do they use a certain technology? Is it within a certain timeline of something else? Can I get to the key buyers that are going to make a difference? There's all kinds of things that are about fit when we're qualifying. And then for me, the next stage, I often call cultivating, because cultivating is that time when we're building relationships, we're answering questions, we're solving, we're dealing with objections, we're figuring out the best solution, we're writing a proposal, we're revising a proposal, we're going back and forth in a relationship, coming up with the point where they can say, yes, this is what we want, and that's a price that's acceptable. And that is when we start close, right? When we get the verbal agreement, we never, ever, ever say, yeah, they said they want it, therefore it's closed, right? That is the point where we begin closing. I need a signature, I need a check, I need sign off by legal, I need a purchase order, whatever it is I need in order for this to be official, not just verbal. And that's how I think about stages. And it's a really different approach than Mike has in the language, in the execution a little bit, but really when you get down to it, we're really going through the same process. We've just called it something different. So whether you do it past tense or present tense, or ing, progressive, be consistent.
Yeah.
You don't get to switch between past tense and present tense and ing because that's a place of utter chaos.
Yeah, and the alignment comes from that same school of thinking. Like Liz's dad, it was very important to the early stage of my sales career as we were going through, and this is the foundational part of what the Catalyst sale process is. There's some iteration that's been made because there are some problems that I needed to solve for in certain organizations that I was working with, and I also like to simplify stuff. As much as it might look complicated when you look at the stuff on the whiteboard, it starts to feel really math and science. You can organize and get into the specific process and say, hey, what's the specific job to be done of this stage? Or what's the job to be done of this activity? Or what's the job to be done of whatever, or this data point that we put in the CRM? And the thing that I would challenge people on, I know one of the things we said we're going to get into the mistakes, Liz hit on a couple of them. Lack of clarity around definition. So if you ask everybody in your team how they define solutioning or qualifying, and they're using the same word, but all of their definitions are different, you have a problem. And it's kind of like the scene in Princess Bride where the dude's walking around saying inconceivable, inconceivable. And they say, you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. Words do have meaning. And this is one of those where organizations will make mistakes over and over and over again. Another mistake that will end up happening is you use a different sales process for forecasting in other functional areas of your business. I am not a fan of that. I like to have the same process in every functional area, but I can change a variable like probability of sale. If it's an existing customer and I'm looking at add-on business inside that organization, my probabilities are probably a little bit higher than a new customer acquisition. Or on a renewal deal, if I keep them separate, probabilities are higher, but they still go through those same stages. You're going to qualify, you're going to solution, you're going to close, you're going to, in some cases, unfortunately, close lost. But make sure that you have definitions and then have those definitions serve purposes across different functional areas. Then when you come together as a team, you're actually talking about the same thing. Change the probability variable. Don't make this any more complicated than it needs to be. You can simplify.
So I think that this whole thing about percentages is a really important discussion, because I think it can completely undermine all of the work you've done around agreeing on language. So there's this automatic thing that happens in the CRM where it says this, if it's in this stage, the probability is going to be this. And we do that because we need high level data. We need to be able to say, on average, if it's in this stage, there's a 25% chance of closing, or a 50% chance of closing, or 90% chance of closing. So when you gather all of the data together from all of the sales reps, it's typically pretty accurate. And if it's not, then you will begin to say that those numbers aren't accurate. We need to do something different. The problem comes when individual salespeople feel tied to that number. Well, this is in solving or cultivating or whatever stage we want to call it. But I only think, I don't know, there's not a 50% chance. There's maybe a 20% chance this is closing. I'm going to leave it up in prospect. Well, that's not where it is in the buying process, but it's the percentage that the salesperson thinks is accurate. And they're afraid to be measured on something that might not be accurate. This is where you get into the sandbagging idea, right? Where salespeople are moving things around and making stuff up to protect themselves. So what we want to make sure is that if the salespeople can see that number, that they, sometimes I don't let them see it. I'm like, just hide that number. Just don't make it visible to the salespeople. We have a second one that the salesperson is able to manipulate, where they can, this is their number, and they can say, this isn't qualified, but I feel really, really good about it. I want to move it up to 50%. Or this one is ready to close. It's in solving. There's no way we're getting it, but we're bidding it because I want the opportunity to bid next time. Or, whatever. We're not a good fit for this, but we had to bid it anyway. Whatever the answer is. It gives them that ability to not put it in the wrong stage because they're afraid of probability. So either remove the probability discussion from them or give them the opportunity to manipulate their probability without manipulating the accounting probability side of it, the finance side of it.
This is a leadership issue. Like if your reps are afraid of anything as it relates to the kind of work that you're doing, what kind of work are you doing? Like it's,
but they are afraid. I mean,
no, I know, right. I know you see it over again. And what ends up happening is this is the challenge that you have when you have high performing individual contributors get moved into sales leadership roles without understanding functionally how a sales process works. And then they struggle with communicating that up and around throughout the organization. So then they start manipulating they manipulate the forecast, and they get into things. The one that drives me nuts is when people start reporting on things like, this is my best, this is my worst, and this is my commit. Like, are you freaking kidding me? Let's let the system serve the purpose that it's intended. don't have a crap close one date because it's right at the end of the quarter and you want to keep everybody off your back and then have it leak into the next quarter, because that doesn't help anybody inside the organization with forecasting. And don't just push everything way out because you don't have a date and you just artificially decided to put one in there. At least align it with something functionally inside the business, like a fiscal year or a budget cycle or an MBO, like something. Like it drives me nuts. And Liz knows this. And typically on these things, whenever we start talking about some of the leadership stuff, it just drives me nuts that crap leadership creates this situation where we reinforce or enable poor behavior. And it's primarily because we haven't been really clear around what's the job to be done of the thing. So the job to be done of the process. So that's another mistake that we make with sales process, is if we think the sales process is fundamentally going to change the way that people engage with their customer, I think we're making a mistake. Let's give them a approach that they use to engage with their customer. If we think our sales process is fundamentally going to change how buyers buy, we're making a mistake. Yes. We're asking the process to serve the wrong purpose. I'm walking around with this golf club. If I tried to drive a golf ball with this golf club, I would be in a lot of trouble. I'm holding onto a putter.
But I can hit it almost as far with my putter as I can with my driver, and I've proven that.
Some days that's the case with me too. It's such a frustrating game. And all of these games that we play get really frustrating when we try to apply the wrong tool or the wrong process to the wrong situation.
Right.
As you can tell, I got fired
up. So those are a couple of mistakes. Remember that those percentages really are an aggregate number. And the idea is that we typically get around 50% of the ones that are in this stage. That's what that number means. It does not mean there's a 50% chance that this particular lead will close. And if you drive your salespeople to think that, you're going to create bad behavior, which is putting things in the wrong stage, lying about the close date, all these things. So the mistake around the sales process is putting the wrong kind of pressure around the wrong kinds of things. So another mistake I want to talk about, which is my favorite one, not my favorite one, but the one I see most often, is when we start naming things with an activity. So, and I think this comes out of SaaS, and SaaS being in many cases a single buyer. So what Mike and I are talking about now really is a complex business to business sale. So you may not need a buying process that's very complex if it's one person and you talk to them once or twice and close a deal. That is not what we're talking about. You don't need all of this if you have a system, a process like that. And I think in SaaS, many times what's happening is the seller is talking to one person who's buying for an organization, and they're hoping that it won't be a complex decision, that one person will do it. So they'll have a meeting, they'll do a demo, they'll write a proposal, and they'll hope to close it. And so they name the stages like that. And this has bled over into other industries and created absolute and utter chaos. And what I mean by that is if the stage is demo, and I completed the demo, so I move it to the next stage, that assumes I only had to do one demo. But if I'm in a complex business to business sale, I might have to do 3 or 4 demos with different people at different stages along the way. So, but if I did a demo, I have to move it to the next stage because the demo is completed. Once the demo is completed, if I wrote a proposal, then the next stage is closed. And so I send the proposal, I move it into closing. Right? Now, that means every single person I sent a proposal to is in the bottom of the funnel. Well, people might ask for a proposal at any point along their buying process. And one of the most glaring examples of doing this wrong is a company that sold pharmaceutical product. It's a long story, but they were helping companies who were creating pharmaceuticals, and people would come to them very early stage and say, can you give me a budget? Can you write a proposal so I can take this to my funders? Guess where that was in the funnel? They wrote a proposal, so it's at the bottom of the funnel. So when you have activities, it's really hard to go backwards and say, well, I wrote the proposal, but this really isn't qualified yet, because we don't have qualify as a stage. We have demo and meeting and proposal as a stage. Those are activities that happen within stages. Demo might happen across several stages. Proposal, the first proposal might be to somebody who has absolutely no authority whatsoever, that's going to take it back to the team for a discussion before you even really know what's supposed to be in the proposal. So it's really important that we not confuse activity, or we end up with activity and stages, or we end up with this funnel that has this huge bulb on the bottom and everybody's wondering why it doesn't close. My dad used to call it a constipated funnel.
Yeah.
All this stuff is in there and nothing's coming out because it's not real.
I had that conversation with the CFO yesterday about some stuff that we're running into, and it's the same. It's not the same. Some of the same kind of things, in that in this instance, proposal sent is we're going to send a lot of proposals that are out there, and what we're trying to figure out is, do we incorporate another stage, and it might end up being that proposal approved rather than proposal sent, because the proposal sent is an activity. But the reason I bring it up is these things will happen inside organizations based on the workflow that happens inside the organization and the preconceived notions that people have around how work happens, like how business happens. The other thing that will influence, that will drive you absolutely nuts when you're working through and building this, is somebody will read a book. And they'll read the book that says that demo is a stage and discovery is a stage and whatever the heck else it is that they have as a stage. But they're writing a book based on a model that they were introduced to while they were a member of that organization, not a model that they built. They might not even have been reporting on how those models worked, or they might have been selling for Zoom in March of 2020. Where
Right.
I don't care what you called your stages, your probability of sale was probably pretty high and everything was moving through really quickly. And you could have called them and had them serve any purpose, and you would have thought you were a genius because you create opportunities and you close opportunities. So be careful, buyer beware. Be careful what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between proposal sent and proposal approved.
Yes, huge
Because
difference.
you could have 9 iterations of a
Right.
proposal,
Yeah.
depending upon the complexity of your company.
Yeah.
So, and where does RFP fit into this? So let's stop this conversation.
Okay.
And let's talk about let's talk about activities, and let's talk about tools and all of the different things you need along the different stages in our next little segment. How's that sound?
I want to thank all of our friends for not showing up today.
Bryn, Daryl, John, Renee, Chris, thanks for not being here. We're having so much fun without you. Okay, so join us in our next podcast if you want to talk about what happens in each of the stages. Okay, you ready?
Always.
Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is your Sales SOS Podcast. I'm here with Mike Simmons today, and it's just the two of us. The rest of your Sales SOS crew is on vacation because it's July. So Mike and I have been talking about sales process, and if you've missed the other two, go back and listen. We've had 2 podcasts so far talking about process. Mike and I love to debate and discuss sales process. Right now, we've talked about what is the sales process, and we've talked about what are the stages. I want to talk about what happens in those stages. Like what should be happening in there? What are the rules? What are the activities? How do we make this usable instead of it just being something very esoteric? How do we make it a concrete usable tool? So that's what we're going to talk about now. We've talked about mistakes, but I know that as we're doing this, we're going to highlight some more mistakes that companies and people make when they're working through the sales process. So when I think about, let me just clarify a little bit more. When I think about this and I think about the different stages, I kind of go through this process, and I actually have a tool. If anyone wants it, you can send me a LinkedIn and I'll send it to you. It's my sales process tool. And what I do is I say, okay, let's list the stages. Then on the left-hand side, we're going to list the stages and we're going to define the stages. So if my stage is prospect, my definition is finding opportunities for new business. Okay. And then I'm going to have what I call a gate or a rule. The gate that moves you from prospecting to qualifying. What's the rule? You have to have them agree to have a conversation about that opportunity. So maybe it stays in prospecting until you can actually talk about something specific. So I have a stage, I have a definition, I have a rule, a gate that moves it from one stage to the next. And then in the next column, I have activities. What are the activities that should be happening in the stage? If I'm prospecting, what should I be doing? If I'm qualifying, what should I be doing? And then I have another column that's called questions. There are different questions that need to be asked during the different stages. And the same questions may come up over and over again as what my dad would call confirmation questions. Is that still the date you intend to sign off? Or is that still the date that you're going to build this? Is that still your go live date? Is there anybody else who's going to be involved in this sales process? Some of them come up over and over and over again. And by listing them, it helps sales reps remember that they happen more than once. And then my last column is what I call content or tools. What does the salesperson need to be successful in each one of these stages? And when I'm working with companies, it's often interesting how many of those critical pieces are missing. They've just assumed the salesperson is fine. So the salesperson either makes stuff up or jerry rigs a solution or whatever. And those can include things like, I need the CRM at this point. I need a tool for creating a proposal. I need a signing tool. I need a timeline. I need a list of definitions. Like, what are the things that the buyer and the seller need in order to make this transaction or this process happen? So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about, well, what should be happening in each of these stages? So, Mike, does that give you a launching spot for, you want to talk about the different stages and what activities should be happening, or what's going on in your brain after I said all of that?
I think it's awesome. And I mean, that's the thing. If you can't answer those questions, then you're not enabling or empowering your team to be effective in the way that they work through the stages of the sales process. And you make it very hard for that stage to do the job that it was intended to do. And I love how you highlighted the importance of naming, defining, having a criteria, exit criteria, some kind of a thing, a gate, something that gets them out of that gate, rules, the specific questions, the specific activities, and then that layer, that foundational layer that I think a lot of us miss on, which is communication and tools. How do we help people? What kind of tools do we make available for people to be successful in each of those stages? Because what ends up happening, and we've seen this all over the place, or at least I've seen this all over the place, and I don't know if it happens as much anymore, but have you ever gotten into a situation where you've ever sent a proposal to someone and you inadvertently left another company's name in it?
Yes, I have done that.
We all have. And we go through and we do the whole find replace, and we go and we try to get all of them out of there, and then we don't proofread it. And have you ever had one of those situations where someone on a team creates an amazing proposal that's winning all this business, and then there are a couple of typos in the bullet points that are included in that proposal, and that typo now has just been used at scale across an organization. And even though the customer didn't notice it and we didn't notice it, it's still not a good look for us as a business. We laugh because these things happen, and they will continue to happen. And one of the ways that one of the control pieces that you can put in, one of the things that you can use to help is get your marketing team involved in a customer communication throughout each of these stages. This is what they do.
Marketing always says, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, so I just do top of the funnel. Well, here's your list of what you need to do. Here it is. And those mistakes, one of my clients just, one of their salespeople put US dollars instead of Canadian dollars or yeah. Oops.
Yeah. Right.
Right. These things happen. So how does the organization support the salespeople so that they're not making these kinds of mistakes? What kinds of tools, what kind of checks need to be in place to support them? And I want to back up though, just for a second though, because I think these questions should be asked during each of these stages, or these activities should happen. I think demo should happen in the qualify stage, or whatever it is that's in my head that should happen. Yep. And the client says, well, yes, we want to do this, blah, 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 but I'm not the one that's going to demo it. Let's get through the process. We need to get a proposal and do a whole bunch more before anybody's willing to look at a demo.
Yeah.
So then we don't hold up the entire sales process and force them to keep it in qualify, and we won't write a proposal until they've done the demo. Like, no, sometimes we have to loosen up our rules a little bit because the client needs things done differently. So don't make your CRM and your sales process so rigid that you force salespeople to either make stuff up or leave stuff in the wrong stage or whatever. You really want to support them to keep things moving forward.
Yeah. And there's the way that I like to describe this, or I think the kind of I don't know if this is a metaphor or an analogy, and this just hammers me in my lack of command of the English language, but it's, we're not baking.
Right.
It doesn't have to be measured perfectly and put in at a certain time and delivered this way. We're cooking. We've got some creativity and some flexibility, and we can add a little bit of flair as we go through this. We're cooking. We're not baking. If you're asking your team to bake and you have a bunch of cooks, you're going to be in trouble. And so you can create some flexibility in the way that you work with your team. The other thing I think you've got to do and be really careful about is, especially if you bring on like an enablement person to help you inside your organization, they get so excited about all of this stuff and they just want to put more in, and they just want to put more in, and they just want to put more in. And the more you add, the greater the complexity. Simplify, reduce, start eliminating as much as you can in each of those things, each of the tools that you have available, and you will help to reduce friction in the buying process for the customer and in the sales process for your reps. So don't just add it in because it's really easy to add digital things in there, and there's an open container that can be huge. Think about it in this context. When I'm looking at those cards that have all those lists of questions that Liz was talking about and the activities, what happens if it could only fit on an index card for each of those stages?
Right. And mine have to fit in a box, right? There's a box. It has to fit in a box. You can't take up pages. And because the salespeople can't do it. And what happens is we start creating processes that force our salespeople to act unnaturally.
Yeah.
So when I say salespeople, there's not this thing called a natural salesperson. There is natural engagement behavior. And we've all been in a meeting where a salesperson asked us question after question after question. And even though we answered it kind of in a different way, like I have to ask every one of these questions. And as a buyer, I really don't care what you have to do. It has nothing to do with me. I answered all of that in my opening discussion when I told you what I wanted. Every single thing you've asked me has been there. You know, if you want to verify details about it, great. But don't drag me kicking and screaming through your process. Don't
read your CRM. Look at the records. Listen to the call.
Yeah, and listen to the person that you're talking to. So when you tell your salesperson, they have to check off the answers to each one of these things and prove that they asked it to the customer. Stop that kind of nonsense. Stop with this. This is the script. You must say exactly this. And when they do this, you have to say this. And that is not what Mike and I are talking about, because that is nonsense.
Well, and when you do it, what will end up happening, and Liz has talked about this a couple of different times, it's come up as a mistake that ends up happening in part of this process, is we as leaders or some enablement professional or RevOps person who hasn't carried a bag comes out there, sold, carried a quota, comes in there and says, we need to add that into the CRM. We need to add that in the CRM. We need to add that in the CRM. And you know what? We're going to make that a required field. Now all of a sudden you're limiting people's ability to get things moving forward. So now, okay, it's a required field. I don't have the information.
I'll make something up.
I'll make something up. I'll guess.
Salespeople are really great at making stuff up.
Really, really, really amazing at making stuff up. I mean, they can, and the one that I love, Liz talked about, importance of next step in some of the in stages. And that's a really important field for me. It's a really important field for me because I can see, and I forget if we can curse and swear on this, so I won't, but I can see bull crap behavior in a CRM when every one of the deals next step look the same. Like, come
Follow
on.
up. Follow up. Let's talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about this. When we go to CRM, let's talk about this specifically and how some of the chaos that gets created in this. But this idea that the sales process is an enablement tool. It is not handcuffs. It is not cement boots. It is not a straitjacket. And if you're treating it like those things that limit the ability of the salesperson to progress a deal, you've got a problem. Now, are there times when you say, look, until you know this deal hasn't gotten past this stage?
Right.
This only works with Macintosh computers. If they don't use Macs, we can't sell to them. Okay. If you don't ask that question, you're wasting everybody's time. But don't say, well, we can't move it forward. We can't write a proposal unless they confirm that they have a budget. Maybe the person that you're talking to requires a proposal to bring to the rest of the team to talk about creating a budget.
And how awesome is that? They get to create it.
So if you say we're not writing a proposal until you've done these things, what you're saying is we don't care what your buying process is. This is our sales process and you must follow it. Yeah. And we don't want to do that. What we want to do, again, is how do I help a salesperson prioritize, stay on track, make good decisions, not miss important steps? These are the things that we want our sales process to do. We want it to also give us information. If I look at this aggregate data, what do I see? If I look at the salesperson's funnel in the CRM, because they've been following this process, what do I see? How can I support? And when we stop thinking about what the salesperson has to do and start thinking about how do we enable the salesperson to successfully sell, it completely changes the conversation. It just completely changes the conversation.
And it sounds simple because it is. It's hard work. We make it more complicated because we did it this way someplace else, or I heard somebody else say that they did it this way, or so-and-so is our best salesperson and this is how they do it. Like, come on. Lead, people. Like, lead. Ask questions. We've talked about this before, the role reflective model. What, so what, now what? What, so what, now what? If we ask those questions, like what's the purpose of this? What's the question? What's the question that we want to ask? What's the purpose? What's the thing that we're trying to solve? So what? If we're able to solve it, what does it mean? Why is it important? Now what? What are we going to do with it when we have the information? If we go through that, you can start to figure out maybe there's some stuff that you've got in your process that we're talking about here that you can eliminate. Some of the tools you can eliminate. Some of the questions you can eliminate. Some of the questions that get repeated multiple times to validate and confirm that progress is still happening. Don't overcomplicate this stuff. And I can, there's two really, really bad sides of this. One is complete lack of process. And then the other one is over-engineered process, overcomplicated, that just kind of stifles things and ends up adding like sand into the gears of the machine that you're building through.
Yeah. And so if you go to that what, so what, and now what, and we start thinking about what is the sales process? Why do we need to have it? Like, what are we creating here? And so what? So what if I fill out all of these things in the CRM about the sales process? So what's that going to get us? And I think, the now what is how do we create this sales process that enables success? How do we create the sales process so that the entire organization can support what sales is doing. Not how do we force the salespeople to do everything everyone else in the organization wants and needs them to do.
Yeah.
Um, the sales doesn't do everybody's work. I think everybody thinks they should. I need to know this, and I need to know this, and I need to see this, and I need this, and marketing needs this, and accounting needs this, and ops needs this. And at some point, maybe sales doesn't need to do every single one of those things. Maybe there's a transition process where ops gets the rest of the information, or, in some organizations, there's a proposal written, and even though the customer signed off, it's still it's a provisional, because there's work that has to be done to ensure that it can be done that way. Are all your computers up to date? Do you have the cabling, whatever it is that has to happen? Somebody has to assess it before they can do a final with everybody signing off. But you're not going to do that second stage until you have some sort of commitment from the client. So understanding what's the process, how do we need to do it, what is sales's role in this, I think is another important part.
Yeah. And one of the cool things when you do this across an organization and you start working together is you can start to figure out, where can I bring other people in at the right time? Whether it's post-sale or it's during the parts of the sales process. How can I bring people in, and how can they gather more information? Because it just sounds more natural when someone from product is asking this question, or someone from support is asking this question, or success is asking this question. And when you do it, and this starts to get into some of the tactics of good sales, you can start trading people. So you might want access to the person who's ultimately responsible for implementing this software inside the organization. You bring your customer success person in and have them meet each other before the deal has been closed. Now, there's some risk that you take on every time you add a new layer to it, which people will say, but if you plan for it and you design for it, you could actually improve the likelihood of success, because you're introducing new people, building those relationships, and helping to ensure that the baton that gets handed off, if you're in one of those organizations where after you close a deal, it gets handed off to somebody else. When that baton gets handed off, it's handed off to somebody who already has been part of that discussion. And I've seen it happen inside organizations where people would say, well, I don't want to get customer success involved too early, because if I do, they might ask a question that hurts my deal. Or I have a technical person that comes in and they ask a question and it takes us backward. Here's the way that you solve for it. Have a simple process. Communicate the stages to the people that are coming in. Make sure everybody's aligned on the call plan, and highlight where the potential risk is. And you know what? You'll find out that they might actually help you move a deal faster than you were able to do on your own, because they were able to talk technical to the technical people, or project to the project people, or whatever.
Qualify something out that you think is a good deal, but is going to create chaos on the other end that you're never going to get paid for because you didn't identify a problem.
Such an important piece. Liz, I mean, how many times have we seen that happen where stuff gets tossed over and then they go through and start doing a customer implementation, and it's like, why did we sign this up? We can't do anything unless they're working on a Mac. You've missed that Mac checkbox, and now we're screwed. Like we've hurt our customer and we've hurt our internal team.
And literally watched a deal crumble because there were a couple of computers that couldn't update to the new operating system because they were too old, and they weren't willing to replace those computers. They did the implementation and everything fell apart because nobody identified that they had those old computers, right? Yeah. So finding out what could go wrong is important, and it needs to be part of the sales process.
It does.
The other thing is when you have it built into the sales process that the production team or the product team or the customer success team or whoever it is comes in at a certain point, it's easier for sales to call them in. So often we have somebody who has multiple jobs, and one of their jobs is sales engineer along with everything else. And the salesperson can never get them on a meeting. They're never available. Well, if I have a sales process that is included as part of the sales process. And when these things happen, that person is notified that the next step is that they're going to have to get on a meeting. Then it's not, hey, the salesperson asked me last minute, I had no idea this was coming, blah, blah, blah. Build it into the sales process. If there's multiple people involved, get them involved, get them written in, get them notified so that there's not this problem.
Yes. The one that drives me nuts in that instance, just because I think we've got a little bit more time on this one. Liz hit it out of the park with her description right out of the front. There wasn't a lot more to add for context or color in what we're talking about here, as far as all of the things that happen in each of these stages. It's, answer those questions. What's the definition? What's the rule? What are some of the questions? What are the activities? How can we support? One of the challenges I ran into inside an organization a while back was we had a company that decided we're going to do no meeting Wednesdays. And the technical, the application engineer or software and sales engineer or technical person inside the organization who has to do the technical work we said no meeting Wednesday. Why'd you put this on my calendar? Well, it just happened to be the only day that the client could meet. Be careful about the expectations that you set inside your organization when you decide to roll out some new kumbaya no meeting Wednesday thing inside your business. Come on. Like if we eliminate a lot of those meetings because of no meeting Wednesdays, we might have no meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because there's not going to be anything to do inside the business.
Or we have to have 2 weeks notice or a week's notice or whatever it is. And then the salesperson's like, I'm sitting here and the CEO just walked in and like, I need somebody right now. And they're like, well, you didn't give us any warning. We can't do this. I didn't have any warning. This just happened. We're going to close this deal right now. Right. And we can't do it. You didn't give us warning. It's not part of the process. And that stuff has to stop. It just has to stop.
Like, what are we here for? Yeah.
If you are customer focused, if your customer is the most important thing, why would you say no to your customer when they want to meet with you?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I'm in product. Customer isn't the most important thing for me. It's not. That's a problem. All right. I think we did a really good job on this. Let's wrap this segment up and join us in the next segment where we're going to talk a little bit more about the CRM and sales process alignment. You good with that, Mike?
I'm good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS Podcast. And today I'm here with your only crew member, Mike Simmons, because everyone else is on vacation because it's July. And we're going to be talking about sales process. And right now, we've had a couple conversations. So if you've missed them, go back and listen to the earlier podcast. But now we're going to talk about how do you align the CRM and the sales process. And I think this is where we see the biggest number of mistakes and chaos and problems. So we're gonna just dive in from where we were and just sort of talk about what's happening in these CRMs that is creating such chaos. And we've talked about some of these already in the earlier segments, but let's just start again. So we have to get the sales process and the CRM aligned. That's the first thing. What does that even mean, Mike? How do you?
Well, I mean, it gets to the stuff that Liz has shared in some of the other sessions and that we've been talking about here over the course of the last bit of time. It's having a definition, knowing what your stages are, naming them, having a definition associated with them, having some rules associated with what is required for exit criteria or movement into that next stage, getting through those gates. And I think the big challenge that ends up happening inside organizations in this alignment piece is it is super easy to just keep adding more into the CRM because there's these big data tables of stuff. So we can add a new field because somebody wants to report on it. And we can add another so somebody else wants to report on it. And we can add this and we can add that. And then all of a sudden what you do is you create this disjointed mess of Liz's favorite word, chaos, that happens inside an organization where suddenly the tool is no longer enabling the revenue team. It's no longer enabling the process. It's no longer enabling the ability to get data out. The tool's not working for us. We end up working for the tool. And that is the thing that drives me absolutely nuts when it comes to these CRM implementations. And a lot of it relates to complete lack of alignment around what our goals and objectives are of the business, what we want to be able to report on, and what the job to be done is of that specific tool.
So when we make everybody else's needs priority over the sales team. So if we start with the idea that the CRM is there to enable the sales team to do their work, that is the starting point. It wasn't created for accounting. It wasn't created for the product team. It wasn't created for the customer success team. It was created for the sales team. This whole notion of a CRM came out of the need for a sales team to do this work. And so if we remember that the core, the center is about the customer relationship. This is the customer relationship. And the salesperson and sales. If we start there, we can then say, okay, I understand that's the core, most important objective is to help the sales team sell successfully. Now, the first thing we think about is what is the sales process? And so we start by sometimes there are different sales processes. Sometimes we have a simple sale. It doesn't have this long sales process. There's only one person involved. Sometimes we have very complex deals. Sometimes we have we might have different processes, but in general, we have one process for all of the products, and we're going to figure out how to document that process in the CRM so that the salesperson can do their job and everybody can understand what's going on. That's what we're doing. That's all we're doing now. Right?
Yeah, it's basic simple stuff. It's this tool has a specific job to be done, and that's to from a leadership perspective, it's to help us with forecasting. Right? I mean, like that's a big thing. If we can forecast accurately, we can get comfortable taking on additional risk by bringing on headcount that can help us with fulfillment, or turn on other investment things that can create more opportunities on the front end. But if we have good data, we can start to make effective decisions or informed decisions, that will help us operate the business. So that on the leadership side, so it serves a purpose there. On the sales rep side, on the individual contributor side, the same kind of thing. If we're going to enable them and empower them to operate their own business, let's give them a tool to manage and operate their own business. And this is where that customer relationship management database tool that came up has really helped organizations. But then all of a sudden you add in ops and service and marketing and all of these other things that get integrated into the system. And before you know it, it starts to turn into this like Gordian knot of stuff.
You create all these rules. You create these drop downs that have 100 choices. Yeah. You add all these extra fields, and I think I told you this one before. I have a client that accounting would not let sales put a company into the CRM until they were approved they went through the process of being approved and able to purchase, right? Credit check and everything. That is not helping the sales team do their job.
No.
Right. So what are you putting in there? Are you giving the salespeople space to do their work? One of the areas where we didn't talk about this earlier, where I see the biggest confusion is I have all this work to do at the top of the funnel, and I need a way to do that work. If I'm not going to create an opportunity until later in the process and it's already qualified, where am I doing all this top of the funnel work? Where am I tracking it? Who can see it? So I literally had a client who said, my sales team's not doing any top of the funnel work. They're just waiting around till we give them a deal. And I said, hey, tell me, you guys, to the sales team, tell me about the top of the funnel work that you're doing. And they all handed me spreadsheets.
Wow.
They were doing a tremendous amount of work. They all had spreadsheets. They were actively working, but there was no place to put this in the CRM. And I see this over and over again. There's this question about when does something become a deal or an opportunity, and how else can it live in the funnel in the CRM, not in the funnel, so that I can watch the deal stages or watch the life cycle stages change
Yep.
and manage my work. So there has to be a place for the salespeople to track the work that they're doing. And clearly, if upper management doesn't want to be upset at them, they have to be able to see that work. And I think that's one of the biggest things about the way CRMs are created now, that it's very hard to do that, to manage and track that top of the funnel work in a way that is practical. I don't want 10,000 things in my funnel because they're ideas that I have, but they need to be somewhere so I can remind myself to do the work.
I think we're finally going to get to a point where we kind of disagree on it today. And it's been a little bit. We've talked about a number of different things. We might disagree a little bit in language and vocabulary and some of those things, but functionally, from a jobs to be done perspective, we're really well aligned as it relates to all of this sales process stuff. On the technology side, I actually think CRMs have made it easier for folks to keep track of that type of work, especially when you integrate your CRM with tools like your email system. So whether through Gmail or Outlook or Exchange or whatever it is, however you're communicating with your customers, if you integrate that into your CRM and keep that information current at a contact level based on the integration, not where you have to go in and then send it to another address or you copy and paste it, which is what we used to do way back when. But you integrate those systems, then when you do the work in Gmail or on your phone, it just magically goes and shows up in the CRM. And some tool, and I'm a big HubSpot fan. I'm a HubSpot fan and a Salesforce fan. I've implemented.
So I just have to, this is one of the places where Mike and I disagree. The more I work it, I thought I loved HubSpot. Like I hated it, but I thought I loved it. And now I'm ready to pull my hair out again.
Yeah. So
I find it very difficult.
We need to have a conversation and go through your HubSpot instance, because the biggest
all
challenge
of my different companies' HubSpot instances,
all of them, all the way across the board. And what ends up happening is people overcomplicate the HubSpot instance and they try to make it do things that it's not supposed to. And the ones who are the worst at it are the freaking HubSpot implementers who started thanks for rolling your eyes, who started as marketers and then now are playing sales. And then they're starting to play success. And again, this gets me fired up because I see it happen. And they go in and they're like, oh, well, this is how you're going to build out your sales process. And this is what it's going to do. But they've never really sold anything in their lives. And they've not managed a sales team. But they're doing what HubSpot tells them to do and creating the dashboards that HubSpot tells them to do. And that's wrong. It doesn't help. It doesn't serve their customer. And there are going to be some people who are going to respond back to this and be like, Mike, you don't know what you're talking about. You've just not worked with the right HubSpot implementers. I can tell you over and over again with each of the ones that I've worked with, there are parts of it that I have to take over. Now, I have serious control issues. So the reason why I maybe take
that, Mike, we do know that. But I will say that this is true with any implementers I've worked with. And, from NetSuite to Salesforce to HubSpot to Zoho, I've done all of them. And what I will tell you is the people who are implementing don't have a clue. They're tech people. They are not people who've ever done this process. And they have to be managed very, very carefully because they think that you know the answers. They think the company knows the answers to things they don't. And really, when you're going to implement a CRM, and I'm going to put in a call out for me and Mike right here is pay somebody to help you get it set up right. And I don't mean an implementer. I mean a strategist. Somebody needs to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what your stages should look like, what your fields need to be, not just what HubSpot says they should be and how it should look and what your report should be and all of that. That doesn't work.
It doesn't. And that's where things where people get really frustrated with it. And the thing that I like to do when it comes to these kind of implementations is make it as simple as possible, complex as necessary. Let's just start with the bare minimum of what we need to have in there. And to get back to that piece that you were talking about earlier, with tools like HubSpot and tools like Salesforce and Dynamics, you can integrate in your communication and your other workflow type tools. So your calendar is integrated, your email is integrated. You might even have your a caller integrated so that when you call people out of the CRM, it shoots to your phone and you're able to call people directly. You integrate other tools out there like a Gong
Right.
or a Chorus.
Right. And meeting, a lot of like HubSpot now has a new meeting tool. Zoho has a meeting tool. Integrate what you can with your CRM so that the sales work that is being done is all happening in one place.
And this is where you get the technology to work for you, not you work for the technology. And too often what ends up happening is people do it. It's like, I remember way back in the day where I kept, and Liz, you might have done the same kind of thing. Like both of us are not as young as we once were, right? So like, I would keep client notes in the Outlook, the contact card that I had in Outlook, and I would just keep it there so that I had a rolling thing that I could go take a look at. I would keep information in a spreadsheet so that I knew what deals I was working on and where things were and what next step. And I wouldn't put it into the CRM because it just didn't work with my workflow. Like there are different ways that we would work through things. Some people had this thing called a Rolodex way back when, and on the back of business cards, it might have had notes about the thing that you're going to follow up on. One of the cool things about these tools that are out there today is a tool like HubSpot has an app where you can take a picture of a business card and it will load the contact information into the CRM immediately. So there are ways that these tools really can help people.
Right. And
the question to ask is, what are we really trying to do with the tool? Yeah.
This idea about contact, there's lots of ways to get the right contact information. One is HubSpot, Zoho, Salesforce. When you're in your email, if you're actually in email instead of in the CRM, you can pull that information right out of the email and put it into the CRM. There are tools that LinkedIn doesn't like that enable you to pull the information right out of LinkedIn and put it into your CRM. So what tools make it easier for the salesperson to use the CRM? No salesperson ever wanted to sit there and type in the address and the phone number and all of that stuff. They don't want to do it.
No.
What's the easiest way to do it? Use a tool like I don't know. I can't think of one. There's a zillion of them that have all of the data for all of the different people in the world.
Sure. Like I mean, in some of these ones, and I was a huge fan of them way back when. And I mean, they're now Zoom Info. Discover.org was one of the ones that I loved because we would sell into technology companies and we'd have just this amazing layout of who the people were, org charts, where they are inside organizations. It's been a while since I've worked with them, but there are a number of these tools that are out there, whether it's an Apollo or Cognizant is a really good one in the UK. Like there are a number of these tools that are out there. There are also some resources that are readily available in other places where you can go get some information. Be careful. Every time you add another tool to the toolbox, you create complexity. Make sure it's earned the right to be in the toolbox, that it's earned its job. And sometimes over time, you end up having to fire tools, and that's okay too. Like you can fire a tool because it no longer has earned its right. It no longer serves a purpose. And I think we've talked about sports. We've talked about cooking. We've talked about cleaning a house, and now we're going to get into gardening. Sometimes you have to prune those tools as you go through it.
Yes, absolutely. And some of the worst complaints that salespeople have is I have to go into 16 different tools to do my job.
Yeah, right.
I have to go here, and then I have to do this, and then I have to go into the accounting, and I have to forget it. If you want your sales team to follow the sales process, make everything available to them in the CRM. You want them to write a proposal? Let it find a tool that lets them do it in the CRM. You want them to book an appointment? Give them the tool right there. You want them to send an email? You want them to dial? It's not that expensive to make it possible for a salesperson to do their job in the CRM. There might be times they have to go out. They might have to design something in a design tool that they can't pull up in the CRM. But you would be amazed how many things you can pull up right in the CRM while you're working to do the work. Every time they leave the CRM, you create a gap in information.
And there are going to be times where you have to have those multiple tools. Like we've got one, and I've got an instance where there's so much technical debt tied with a tool that allows us to quote, where all of the quoting happens in that tool, and we have to integrate it into the CRM. So you have to spend time in both of those. That's okay. Communicate to the team, here's why we're doing it this way, and then build out your plan to either sunset one of those tools if you can, or come up with a better way to help with the workflow of those tools. Like the integration across many of these tools is really, really good when you bring on a good integration partner and you're using current versions of those tools. There are some of us out there using older versions of tools because we've not yet made the transition to a hosted version, as an example. And so know the game that you're playing, know the problem that you're looking to solve, ask those questions, and then start to determine where do you want to invest time, energy, and resource to help with that workflow. Because the better you make that experience for your revenue team, the better your data is going to be, and the better decisions you're going to be able to make as a leadership team inside your organization. So,
well, and the better your return on investment in each of those people, right? If it takes me, I have to go here, I have to go there, I have to go there, I have to come back every single time I move from one app to another,
yep.
The possibility of being distracted increases, right? And I mean, I don't know if you're like me, if I have to go back to my email to find something, 30 minutes later, I now remember what I was doing. Right. So
it's like we were talking about earlier, the whole lose your keys kind of thing, right? Like you have a process, you work the process. As you add more things to it and it deviates from the process, you create potential risk inside the business. So be really careful about what you're adding in there to create that risk.
And make sure things work. One of my clients that
wait, we're supposed to test?
There's always that testing thing. One of my clients, the salespeople and the support team would be putting data in every 15 minutes because the accounting system is old. Every 15 minutes it refreshed and they lost whatever they were in the middle of doing. Like that's the kind of stuff that one, salespeople won't stick around for. And two, what a waste of time. Like fix it. Do not make people live with stuff like that.
And when you go through and you test it, and you'll make mistakes. It's okay. So let people know, look, we're going to roll this out and it's going to be new and we're going to learn and we're going to make mistakes. And as soon as we learn, we're going to adjust, or we're going to determine these are some of the things we have to deal with in the short term, but we're going to communicate effectively. I had an instance where the integration wasn't working really well. So one of the people on the team just realized that if you had the tool work in an offline mode, they could manually do whatever they wanted to in that offline mode. Before you know it, I had an entire team of people working offline and wondered, how come the information's not syncing back and forth? It's because we found a workaround. And you're kind of like, oh no, the workaround created a gap between the data in one system and the other system. So even though we had an integration, it wasn't integrated anymore. We shake our heads and we smile. I smile because I know, I get it. I understand. I've been in those roles where someone puts in a required field and you just don't know the answer. So you check the box, or someone comes up with a workaround. And the reality is if I unplug it from the internet, I'm going to be able to get work done on my own, and I'll just deal with it. I'll get the thing I need to get done now and then deal with it later. If you're not listening to the signals from your team, you're going to create this snowball of technical debt and bad data that at some point in time, you're going to have to rework. So pay attention, ask those questions, work through the workflow stuff. 100%, Liz.
And every time a salesperson says, I'll get back to that, putting that in or doing that piece or whatever, you have essentially created a break in the sales process where something can go wrong.
Yes, you have. Amen.
All right. Are we ready to wrap this up there then? Any
I
last
think we have
thoughts?
had I think we have had an awesome day together. So everybody, thanks for being on vacation. Thanks for giving me Liz alone for the day. So yeah, I think we covered. If we think about it, what did we cover? We covered sales process. We covered jobs of the process. We covered important things to include. We covered mistakes that are made. We talked a bit about jobs and influence that happen across other groups, and we've talked about technology. I think we've had a day.
We've had a day. All right. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Mike, thanks for being a good sport and doing this with me alone. This was great. And we will be back next Friday for LinkedIn Live, and just keep watching our podcast or listening to our podcast wherever podcasts are found.
Where should people go to find you if they have questions?
Oh, they can always find me on LinkedIn, Liz Hyman, or you can go to regardingsales.com and you can find all kinds of stuff there, articles and tools and stuff. And Mike, you're at
findmycatalyst.com is the best place to go to find everything. I am on LinkedIn. I'm one of the original people out there. Mike Simmons on LinkedIn, which is kind of funny to have a name like mine and actually have that in the URL. But LinkedIn or findmycatalyst.com, those are the best places.
Excellent. All right, everybody, happy selling.